We've been overwhelmed with information, leaks coming through, revealing what the Overwatch announcements will be for BlizzCon this weekend, and it hasn't all seemed entirely positive. There's definitely a lot of good news, but there also is concerns alongside it. So in anticipation for the announcement coming in a few days, I thought it was a good time to take a temperature check of where we as a community of Overwatch players feel about the game and where it's going. Then we can have a look back next week once we have all of the information. New stuff is great, but Overwatch 1 doesn't really feel like it's at a high point. So getting news that the developers have seemingly perhaps moved on to focusing on other things, although that new stuff might be insane and really fun and great, it's a bit bittersweet because it doesn't feel like Overwatch 1 has been fully actualized at this current time. So what I did is look through the thousands of comments made on our videos covering the leaks over the past week, and as well directly asked you guys on Twitter. You'll want to be sure to follow us on Twitter so that you can take part in these threads that sometimes get put into videos, and especially if you're going to BlizzCon, we'll be tweeting out where we'll be, so you'll get a chance to meet us if you are there. Myself and Eddie plan to be at the Halloween Day pre-BlizzCon meetup that everyone's doing. The schedule says it's going on pretty much all day, but we should be able to get there by the afternoon or evening, and check us out on Twitter to get updates on that. So let's dig into where the community is feeling with all of the news. It's interesting how mixed the replies are for every type of direction either game can go. Some players are hyped for Overwatch 1 to go free to play and Overwatch 2 to be a separate game, but despite many clamoring for that option, I think that more people would be made upset by that, especially based on the core promise of Overwatch being a games as a service for the foreseeable future. I too would be taken aback if the sequel had some elements of the multiplayer we know now. That doesn't seem to make sense. Either everything carries over, like an expansion, but it's reported that it's not doing that. Instead, it makes more sense for the game to be base PvE co-op, and whatever PvP they do add is entirely different to what we know now, and is probably more akin to the Left 4 Dead PvP, which is like scenario-based and still PvE at its core, but the enemy team can be comprised of players who take control of elite characters and is actually pretty fun. I think Blizzard could do a great job with that. The reason why I like the separate games model is because if you take something like Hearthstone and its solo adventures, the ones you have to pay for are actually incredibly quality. And my favorite aspects of Hearthstone, even after I played it for years as a semi-competitive card game. Overwatch is kind of the Hearthstone of shooters in some ways. It's supposed to be a competitive esport too, but we'll get to talking about that later. And to that extent, they want to branch out with other features for players to consume, even if you aren't a dedicated hardcore gamer. And so the more that Overwatch 2 is disconnected from the first game, the more I think it harms no one, other than the fact that they may neglect developing Overwatch 1, but it's hard to imagine how they could perform worse at that than they already do, beyond just abandoning it altogether, which I don't think is going to happen. But the free-to-play issue is kind of interesting because some players really don't want to buy a new game, but also would be mad if Overwatch 1 went free-to-play. Of course, when you can make free accounts, it's a lot easier to avoid getting banned, spamming new accounts, and either trolling or hacking or whatever degenerate behavior. But my hope would be is if they did do that, they would institute some sort of premium matchmaking for the ranked mode. I know some players would really be upset at that, but it would go a long way to move ranked into actually being a competitive experience in more ways than one. I don't think they're going to do any of these competitive moves that I'm going to talk about later on in this video, but that's where I secretly want the game to go. Let's look at a couple other pros. Undoubtedly, it's a benefit that Overwatch is finally getting a story. This response was pretty funny. I hope Overwatch 2 incorporates some wild new ideas such as a plot, character writing, a multiple act structure, or even a single story act. A story arc, actually moving the plot forward instead of retconning 50 characters every release. You know, nothing too crazy. I hear you on this one. I will say, and remind everyone, Jeff has said in interviews that they were seemingly not happy with the comics, which were sort of the big lore point of the story. I thought they were pretty decent, but the Batiste short story blows everything out of the water and kind of setting a new bar for writing and story, and you would think especially since we know from way back when that they had been hiring story writers, Alyssa Wong being one of them, but working for, what has it been, a year or two, you'd have to think that there would actually be some classic Blizzard storytelling in the PvE adventure, which may take the lore game of Overwatch from 0 to 100 real quick. Let's look at another comment. Afro Legacy lists out some pretty detailed pros and cons here. PvE content, skill trees and upgrades, more lore, and better graphics. The cons, of course, being you can't transfer your skins, maybe split the player base, no new hero at BlizzCon, and they may perhaps neglect Overwatch 1. Some players are afraid of the skill tree thing, but when you imagine it in the context of a purely PvE experience or a Left 4 Dead style one, which may, in fact, yes, be more MOBA-esque. I saw a lot of comments relating it to Paladins. It may play something like that, but I think more in a story-based mission similar to Left 4 Dead. And with that, those upgrades are crucial to making the game feel impactful and fun. The archives missions that we've got the past few years in Overwatch have been decent, but they really relied on the scripted events and the pace of them and them not lasting too long, all of those things to work as a product. If you want to expand that out to a more full-length game, you really need something to mix things up. And even if there is some PvP component of it, it's probably considered a secondary thing and a bit less serious. But I always reserve the right to say that Overwatch 2, the more casual game, has the chance to have a better ranked mode than the first game does. That's entirely possible, shockingly enough. And that is the wacky state that Overwatch 1 is currently in, that the sequel game, which isn't supposed to be competitive, may give a much more reliable experience than the first one, even if it is a completely different one, which is something that I'm kind of looking forward to, but is a hard pill to swallow for many of us who really want to hold on to Overwatch 1 becoming the game we always want it to be. I feel like Overwatch 1 achieves this for like a few months out of a balance cycle. So maybe like a quarter of the time of the year, it's in a place where I can step back and say, man, Overwatch is in a pretty good place. I really want to play it. And then in between that time, we're either needing a new hero to change the meta or needing new balance to rebalance the new hero effect that has come in to destroy the meta. And we're just constantly on this merry-go-round of needing new features, needing more attention, and I'm getting pretty tired of it myself. We got quite a few comments concerned about neglect on the primary game, and I think it's really going to be telling the messaging that comes through at BlizzCon. When they announce this, are they going to have the forethought to ensure us, the current player base, that they're not abandoning us, that they're ready to make the moves to keep improving Overwatch 1 to what the player base wants and needs? In this current moment, we feel quite lacking. The competitive balance is quite poor, and a lot of the reasons that high-level players have fallen in love with the game have been gutted, really, which is the case when far too many easy characters are top meta, and you can see it in the stream viewers, you can see it in the queue times at high levels, and this might not matter to many casual players, but it is an indicator of the game's health. Overwatch has always had a bit of an identity crisis where it tries to appeal to all types of players of video games, not just shooters, not just MOBAs, not even just competitive players, but anybody is invited in to play Overwatch, which is a good thing. But for those who want it to be more of an esport, even if you're not that competitive, a lot of players just don't want cheap things to destroy them and for the game to reward skill, even if they don't have much of it themselves. Otherwise, the experience of playing the game can feel a bit silly. But at the same time, I do think Overwatch as a casual experience is incredibly strong, and the comments that I've got from you guys sort of echoes both sides of this issue, where hardcore players are incredibly concerned that the competitive integrity isn't going to be kept up on, and I mean even just recent moves and how they've handled the balance of the game post the sacrifice of the GOATS comp at the altar of 222 roll queue. I feel like they just haven't even tapped into any of the vast opportunities that they built for themselves with that. I expected a balance overhaul. It never came, and so some of the big effects of the game playing much better just hasn't been felt. So that's already concerning me. And now, if they're going to be shipping a new game and pushing updates out for it, it's concerning that Overwatch 1 will kind of take a back seat, especially when the league isn't on. Kind of rough. But the thing that I've been feeling, and what Conkers here says on Twitter, that as long as they have the staff, which let's remember they have hired a bunch of developers too, or we're looking to do so at least, it could be really good. It would be nice if we saw the sequel and the original game go in two completely different paths, where I want to see moves that Overwatch 1 is being made more hardcore step by step. Roll Q is like 1% towards that direction. It was necessary, but it wasn't going to solve every problem. Whereas if we intend the casual players that want to love the game to reside mostly in the sequel and the casual modes for Overwatch, things could work out, but we're really going to have to see clues of it heading that direction. And a major concern that I have to highlight as well is that so many players are really worried about their cosmetics, and Metro didn't fully leak what this might be because he's unsure if they're even going to commit to the decisions he heard about. But if you think to things like your Overwatch League skins, your Pink Mercy skin that you donated to charity to get, and it's really exclusive, all your event skins, if you bought any of the premium skins like for BlizzCon or for the All-Star games for Overwatch League, these start to really add up, whether you earned them or paid for them. To play a new game with the same characters and have to start over from scratch would upset a lot of people, and this is why I think really there's no way that they're transferring the game over, because then it would have to be an expansion, and I think more than likely it'll have its own entirely different suite of cosmetics, but they may be distributed in a different way as well. A lot of players will be upset at this, but we kind of should have seen it coming because they've been talking about making new and different games in the Overwatch universe for years now. So it really isn't reasonable to expect things to carry over one-to-one, but I think the reason why a lot of players do expect that is because a lot of the gameplay is going to feel the same, right? When you're playing Tracer in the PvE mission, she's going to look the same, the mechanics should feel the same, but you're just in a scenario with upgrades and that kind of thing. One thing that might make this feel different if it is indeed a different engine, like I don't think we would be upset if there was a completely different style of Overwatch game, like, I don't know, an Overwatch RPG or an Overwatch platformer or an Overwatch fighter. I think it would inherently make sense to us that, well, it's a whole new game platform, and maybe that's how Blizzard feels, even though it's like in a similar genre of game with Overwatch 2, but I don't know, players are going to be pretty upset. To be honest, I really doubt we'll find anything about the cosmetics and in-game purchases at BlizzCon. BlizzCon is intended to hype up the game. They're not going to pull a full Diablo Immortal on you and say, oh, don't you guys have enough money to buy your skins twice? They're just not going to do it. There's no way. Even if that is entirely the case, especially if it's the worst case scenario and they have the same skins in the next game that you can't carry over. This will feel a lot better if there's new skins, but the old ones do carry over. That would be great. Because really, like, what are we even asking for? I'm probably completely wrong about this, but I feel cosmetics, although they've become a currency in games, I believe they're like one of the easiest things to develop, and it's more or less just a copy-paste job from one game to another, isn't it? I mean, maybe that's oversimplifying it, but we are just talking about textures, right? So yeah, don't expect anything about this at BlizzCon, in my opinion. Man, it's a whole lot to digest, and I'm just really excited to see what they got come this weekend. Overwatch has never really been in such a weird place where we know what it feels like to want new content and for them to add things to the game. We felt that forever, but now we've got an entirely new problem/solution where there should be a new game around the corner, and we're all trying to process how we feel about it and where we should stand as consumers. I really want to hold my ground and say make Overwatch 1 the competitive game I want it to be, but it feels like Blizzard just does casual things better, and maybe that's what the audience on the whole wants, even if a subset of us are hardcore players that want a more competitive game. I'm really split on this. So continue to give us feedback in the comment section down below. How are you feeling about Overwatch? What are your expectations and hopes for what they're going to show this weekend? What do you need Blizzard to tell you to make you a happy customer? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to leave it a like. It really does help us out, lets us know that you're enjoying the content. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and be sure to hit the bell icon so that you actually get notified when our videos go live. Link in the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, and dank memes. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for Your Overwatch. We'll see you guys next time.